Okay, you beautiful, wonderful patrons, you. It's time to start part 2 of my 3-part Diamond and Sauce series. This is going to be a pretty lengthy video. As I mentioned in the end of video 1, we're going to spend the beginning of this going over some of the base or the root information, if you will, from video 1, so that we can be sure to get a true clean separation and what I like to call a beautiful faceted crystallization or single point multifaceted crystals, terminations that then grow into crystals of THCA. And let me give you some quick examples. Okay, now, so for any of you watching this, do not worry. I haven't skipped anything. We are going to go over all of it. To be able to explain some of these processes in the form of a video, I need some of them for points of reference. So I kind of have to produce everything out of order and then film it in a. Anyway, here we go. It's a little different to teach it than it is to make it. So, what we have here on the left, in case you're wondering, is the jar from video 1. We got a beautiful THCA crash, a really just sweaty, lovely terpene profile left on it, and being that it was, very not fresh at all, trim, I gotta say I'm pretty impressed with it. I'm very happy with it. So this, again, is a product that you can absolutely very easily achieve, and don't let that darkness down there fool you. It's just cured resin with a very, very dark terpene, or with a very, very thick, cured, darker terpene profile. And by that I mean it's not white, it's not clear. So as soon as I stir this up a little bit here, and you let just a little bit of light hit it, and this is Diamonds and Sauce, we can't let light go through it. But just grab you a little breakfast spoonful. As you can see, we have some pretty nice sized little chunky chunkers in there. Not bad at all. But for the most part, what we achieved was a very, very efficient, very beautiful sugar. Now, why did this happen? Why did we end up with so many millions of small, tiny crystals, and a couple chunky ones, but for the most part, millions of small crystals? And I didn't film the terpene separation because it wasn't that exciting. Its crystals were so significantly small that it was a little bit difficult for me to get the puck as clean as I would like, and I didn't feel like it was the best example for teaching. But this finished product is working great for a reference point. Why did we end up with sugar like this? Very, very terpene rich, very THCA rich. But we don't have, say, almost knocked my sea crystals off there. We don't have a big, gnarly, just soaking wet jar of terp sauce, as you can see on this one. And you can probably see from some of the chunks down in there. Yeah, there are a couple bubbles because I was moving it around, taking some pictures earlier. But, anyway. We didn't get quite that separation from this. And I'm going to tell you exactly why. And by quite that separation, let me just go ahead and clarify. And no, I'm not gloved up, so, go ahead and use the comment section to to cuss me out or freak out or talk about how can I be making clean medication when I'm not even wearing gloves? You're right. Unfortunately, these are seed crystals. And by that I mean I'm going to use these to seed the next batch. Now, why have we jumped forward into the next batch as opposed to finishing off this jar on camera for you? Because I'd like to talk to you very quickly about what happened there. Now, can I prove this beyond a shadow of a doubt? Do I have analytical chemistry to back it up? No, I have experience to back it up. So it is possible that some other factors were at play. Maybe a little bit more, or sorry, a little less volatile of a terpene profile. So it, or maybe just less terpenes present to act as a volatile terpene profile, which when making diamonds in sauce are just a wonderful co-solvent that just comes along for the ride. And again, no one is upset about this product. Who would be mad at that? You kidding me? You know how hard it is for me to stay out of this jar? All right. But originally, I set out to teach you how to grow some nice big crystals of THCA. And by big crystals, I mean single crystals that are obviously multifaceted. I mean, look at all the points of faceting and where terminations literally just change directions as opposed to creating another crystal. See, this guy might be a little easier for you to... I feel like I'm trying to show. There we go. See what I'm talking about there? Look at those clear facets, those sharp edges and those super flat sides. Now that is a crystal that those of us that study crystallography, that's the kind of crystals we're proud of. Obviously, maybe not too impressed with the size, but clarity and the crash, excellent. Now, I keep saying now, God damn it. So, to move a little further on with this, those crystals that you're looking at right there, sorry, right there, yes, they were grown by yours truly, and yes, they did come out of the run that we, you didn't see it, I'm sorry, the run that I did directly after this run, and another reason why that did not get photo documented was because I was a little unsure what happened here. So I wanted to make sure that I could repeat the results that I need to repeat to be able to teach you. So I apologize for this incredibly slow 10-minute preface into part 2. But let's go ahead and get started. So we have our BHO sugar that nobody's upset about, but it's not what we were going for. Now, if and when you are after a product like that, you can always, sorry, I got an alarm going off here. You can always, number one, move your jar around a little bit. As soon as you start to see the little precipitation points across the bottom, which I'll show you here by the end of this video, you can keep them from being able to sit still and create large crystals. Now, there's also another method that is very, very, very effective in creating what I like to call sugar, or a batter, if you will. If it would just freaking focus. Sugary batter, THCA rich batter, either way. Now, let's talk about those methods. Number one, everything is in the jar, just like we talked about last time, right when I left you at the end of part one. So, you're in the jar, and you start to see little points of precipitation. You may notice we're outside. And of course, the purpose for that is that I did not reclaim almost any butane for two reasons. Number one, I wanted to be able to show you exactly the point that I get to when I either seed or cap, depending on what method I'm going for. But obviously, because of this, I'm just giving these a little light sun purge. And if you're ever worried about doing this because the sunlight hits them and sunlight degrades THC, you're absolutely right, it does. That's why the solvent performs, or I'm sorry, the solvent literally builds a white wall of frost around where the oil is. And, well, I think we know what white does to sunlight. You know, when you're wearing the black t-shirt and it's hot outside. Let's see if we're anywhere near. Oh, no. We still got a lot of evaporation left to do, and that's okay. There's a large amount there. Those are two huge jars. Now, okay, we're back inside because I didn't want to get too far off topic there. Before we go any further on how to make sure, or not, every extraction will be different. There'll be times that you're surprised, just as I was with this jar. But to ensure your best possible chances of getting beautiful crystal growth like this, and, pardon me, and a nice clean high terpene fraction to be able to separate. And for those of you, that are going to be doing larger runs, a lot of times you end up with so much of a high terpene fraction left, especially when you're growing, these big, clean, clear, faceted crystals, because not all of your THCA will crystallize. So you'll have some high terpene fraction that has your THC. Anyway, it'll point towards a higher volume of your liquid portion. So a lot of you will have more of that than you'll need. You'll mix back in with your THCA, 70-30, 80-20, I don't know, 50-50, whatever you do, whatever you like. However sloshy you like it to be in there. You can see I'm not very, this is obviously still very terpy, but I don't like it to swim. Now don't get me wrong, it's still definitely terpy enough that it's not like it's not like a piece of crumble or a piece of shatter. It will just open up and fall apart. See? So, in my personal opinion, all the flavor and all of everything that you could need is there. Now, is it anywhere near as specifically terpy as this batch? Not quite. Again, a lot of very, very small crystal growth. And no, in case you're wondering, these are not. They're not the same. I'll try and give you there you go. But it's a very, 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 look at this jar. Some strains just produce more of a high terpene fraction. So that's why this one just has it consistently keeps its ability to run itself right out of the jar. Now what that really has to do with is efficient dewaxing. Otherwise that sauce wouldn't be too thick. Now, let's talk about efficient dewaxing and what all you remove besides lipids. Anthocyanin and chlorophyll. I promised at the end of the first video we were going to spend some time, 15 or 20 minutes talking about this, and I'm sorry it's taken me this long to really get into the meat of it, but you know how I am with my visual aids. Aside from in our efficient dewax, single solvent second stage dewax. What we were doing there when we had those jars that I just showed you out on the porch inside of the freezer, and then we would decant them into a clean jar, and then put that clean jar with the clean, or the, significantly less wax extract back in the freezer and let it sit for another however long. If you remember when we made this jar, I think I let it sit in the freezer for maybe 3 hours, maybe 5. That's going to make a lot of sense here in a second. Now, why I did that and why I pulled it so early was, number one, I was excited to get going on the series. But number two, pardon me, was that I really felt like enough of the wax had been removed. I felt like we had done a good, my screens, maybe, I felt like my screens were in check. My secondary filtration system within my closed loop was going to go ahead and remove any of those extra lipids that were going to make it through. And so an insane single solvent secondary dewax maybe wasn't necessary. I was not wrong as far as what I needed to be able to make beautiful terp crystals and to be able to crash a very, very large white puck of what easily broke apart into almost table salt size crystals. And again, more than likely we will have both of these to show to you by the end of the video, because if you want a smaller crystal fraction, or smaller crystal crashing, and less of a terpene fraction and more of a batter consistency like this, when you see your points of precipitation starting, you move your jar. Just interrupt the crystallization. Another great thing you can do there is right about the point that you have a ton of points of precipitation across the bottom, depressurize. Just take the lid right off the top of the jar and let it just do what it's going to do at the temperature in the oven. It'll continue to drop. It'll continue. THCA will continue to crash out a little bit more, but not as in building onto the lattice work of the THCA that has already started to crash out. This will be, the THCA will continue to crash out in multiple points of precipitation until it is essentially filled your high terpene fraction full of sugary crystals. So whenever you're going for the sugar, or whenever you want a battery-like product, there you go. If you want a battery-like product that's a little saucier, like the jar I just showed you, then literally just start to see those points of precipitation and then depressurize. You will absolutely, you will see when you're playing around with how early, like the little bits of crystals you see across the bottom of the jar, the little dots you'll see forming everywhere. I'll show you at the end of this video, at the end of part 2. And we'll also go over at the beginning of part 3 shows you a massive amount of growth in between the end of part 2 and the beginning of part 3. And I also talk about specifically the amount of time that passed in between the end of this video and the next. Okay. Ooh, God, this is a lot of information. I'm so sorry if I'm not keeping it straight, guys. Now, the other way to make sure that you end up with a smaller, much more higher count in crystals, sugary or battery-like consistency. Some of you may be saying, why does he keep telling me how to do that? Well, why would I ever want to do that? There are people that love this shit. There are people that take batter over anything, any day, and I get it. Why do I get it? Look at how homogeneous this is. You're going to get the same amount of flavor and the same amount of THCA in almost every dab. When I have those soaking or swimming around in a little pool of terps, and you reach in and grab one and it has X amount of liquid on it, I mean, each dab is different. And there's really no point in you looking at it and going like, yeah, that's about the amount I want. Because then when you dip it, you're going to totally throw off your THCA ratios. And of course, synergistically, by introducing a terpene fraction into your dab, you're now going to completely change the bioavailability and the overall effectiveness of your THCA. So, again, there's no reason to be mad at the sugar. This is a perfectly homogenized dabbing concentrate that is just wonderful. It tests through the roof. It is an A plus product, and every dab is the same. So for people that are newer to Diamonds and Sauce, that enjoy smoking or maybe want to aid themselves with the medicinal effect, they prefer this generally, at least in the beginning. If you're more like I was in the beginning, you want to grab all these up in like one big scoop and then do a little drip on the top of it and go. Not all of us are trying to set a record to see, how high we can possibly get. So, batter or sugar consistency, again, is something that is very often sought out. Now, you're saying, oh, but Nathan, how am I going to get that timing right? How am I going to know just when to crack that jar? How am I going to... You're right. That is a little bit difficult, especially if you've done what we're going to use these guys for later in this video. And remember, go ahead and write this down in your notebooks. Seed crystals, and underline that. Leave some space, and we'll come back to that so that you can define that. That's going to be very important for later. Now, you want a sugary or battery-like consistency? You're not 100% sure you'll be able to get it because, well, the last 2 or 3 times you've run this strain, even though it may not be this specific harvest, but it is the same strain and it's probably the same pheno if it's coming out of a garden that's being professionally propagated or, run by clones. What do we have here? Oh, a little sterile Pyrex pan. Now, depending on the amount, and by amount, I mean how far up you go on this Pyrex pan. This is a no pressure Diamonds and Sauce. We call this the Pyrex Tech or Pan Tech. You do not, I'm sure you guys aren't thinking that I put this on here at the end. And I'm hoping that'll hold pressure. That would be ridiculous. By efficiently, and I mean efficiently, doing everything that we did with this jar and then letting it sit in the freezer for 48 to 72 hours to let that final disc of wax at the bottom that does appear, whether you think you're fully cleaned or not. It's after that when you're probably not going to get much. Either way, when it appears, you let it sit for long enough that it actually solidifies at the bottom of your jar. And then when you decant, you're able to pour off the top and really keep a nice clean pour, keeping your wax separate of that pour. Oh, I lost my train of thought. Yes, so by taking those steps and going much further, you are going to ensure yourself the ability to crash without even pressure. You can literally just pour into a Pyrex, and if you want a sugary consistency, we're going to do 3 or 4 Pyrexes with just about a 1/4 inch, or maybe a 1/2 inch across the bottom. No, 1/4 inch. 1/8 to a 1/4. 1/2 inch is too big. Seriously, look at the size of some of those crystals. A 1/2 inch is way too big. You're going to get crystal growth that's going to be large. And again, I'm teaching you how to grow the sugar, how to specifically end up with a battery or sugary product. You'll do 3 or 4 little pans like this, or maybe you're doing huge runs. So you're using some big boy pans. Either way, different size Pyrex dishes are wonderful for your lab because depending on strain specificity and how much biomass you have to run, you have the ability to do Pyrex Tech even without a large run. Now, again, sugar consistency, I'm going to divide what I'm about to process in this Pyrex into 2 or 3 or even 4 Pyrexes and make sure that it's not more than a 1/4 inch deep. Then, if I choose to, again, go back to that word, seed crystal, I'll give you a better definition in a second, which I'm sure you already know what it means. But if I choose to seed crystal, then I am not going to seed crystal with something large and faceted. I literally seed crystal with a little bit of extract. Jesus. Yeah, this stuff is very terpy, but it's nowhere near running. Anyway, I seed with just a little bit of extract that is fully cleaned. And of course, because of how high its terpene content is, we only use a tiny little bit of it. And by a tiny little bit of it, I'm just going to go ahead and show you. No, this is not going to get put back in the jar. Come on, little guy. I see you. I see you wanting. There you go. See that? See how that fell off the edge of there? That is literally the amount. When this is down, when I have this, I'll break off this amount 3 or 4 times, however many pans I have, obviously. I have them an 1/8 to a 1/4 inch deep, and I drop a little chunk of already made sugar into what I want to be sugar. Everybody with me so far? Some of you are probably already filling out your definitions underneath seed crystal. And some of the rest of you are going like, does this fucking dude really think I have a notebook out? And yes, I would hope you do. Otherwise, you're not going to retain all this information. This video is just getting started, and we're hitting 30 minutes. So, that is going to guarantee you, by maintaining a low amount of liquid, and what that, of course, is for, is that if you have a lot of depth in here and a lot of high terpene fraction, then you have a lot of room for crystal growth to not only occur, but for the lattice work to then. Lattice work is when a crystal decides that it can grow larger and can form a specific shape. Just like our DNA, it is all completely predetermined within the lattice work of each piece of THCA. So when the lattice work is able to take place, it's usually by a number of factors: depth of terpene fraction, viscosity of terpene fraction, temperature, supersaturation of THCA, etc. Now, how we can control those as best we can, is by not letting enough volume in here to grow a good sized crystal, number one. Number two, stretching our run out into multiple pans so that we can guarantee that we'll still yield all of our extract and have it all crash in a little 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch layer. All right, now we've gone over Pantech. We've gone over Pantech and how to produce sugar. And the reason why I feel like we can move on from here, I'll just tell you why. Everything you saw in that first video is literally all you would need to produce what you see on this spoon right here, on my little breakfast spoon. The only thing you need to do is change the temperature after a 24-hour period, and by that, the reason for that is, of course, because your lids are going to pop if you're sitting at your typical crash temperature. If you remember at the end of the first video here, we put our jar in the oven at around between 70 and 75 degrees. I can't remember exactly. You have to tell me in the comments. Either way, let's call it 73. I did that for 24 to 36 hours so that the remaining excess solvent that's just a little bit more than needs to be there for my supersaturation would pop my lids. And then once it stopped popping my lids, which it only popped one of them, it only foiled or creased one of them, if you will. And I think you guys know what I'm talking about. If you don't, what the fuck? I have like 60 of them. All right, I'll show you that here at the end of the video, or some further on in the video too when we get out to the garage. I'll just you know, when I see it, I'll say this is what I was talking about when I said a foiled lid, and I call it foiled because it's just been bent. Anyway, and it also releases its seal, usually because of the gummed nature around the outside of these lids. Within a second or two, there's enough pressure to go ahead and for it to re-maintain. But that break or crack or foil in the lid, if you will, is technically a burp. And it's a burp that I am not scheduling or that I'm not even asking for. So, what does that mean? I don't want that to happen at the temperature that I want to crash. I want to be done with those. So after 24 to 36 hours, I raise my temperature to, and this is your prerogative, so I'll let you guys play around with it, between 88.5 degrees, and personally, there are times that I'll crash as high as 95 degrees. And I know that's hot, but it gets done fast. Now, what's the differentiation in the temperature, you ask? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1/8 or 1/4 inch filled sauce Pyrex pans here, seated with some sugar, ready to go. We've reached super saturation, and I'm putting them in the oven. No lids, no nothing. I'm just going to let them sit on their shelves, and I'm going to let them crash. We're definitely in at 95, maybe even 98 degrees. Shit, sometimes I get wild with it. I'd like to see it happen overnight. It's pretty sweet. Especially considering I'm not going for an impressive crystal growth. I'm just going for numeration, a large number of small crystals. Then let's just make it happen as fast as possible, right? The other thing about that is, by making it happen as fast as possible, we're required to expose it to a higher temperature. And we all know what those higher temperatures do to the only part of our extract that we don't want in our extract, and that is our hydrocarbon. It boils at 30.2 or 30.3 degrees Fahrenheit. When your extract that has residual hydrocarbons left in it is finishing and crashing without a lid on the top of it at 90 plus degrees. How clean do you think it is by the time it's finished crashing THCA, and we haven't even pulled our first vacuum? Well, I can tell you, I can give you an idea. Within a couple days, 48 to 72 hours, and a crash, I've sent samples, of course, and then a crash, and then I set that aside in a jar, and then I finished all the rest of it, and I purged it for 48 hours, and I sent both samples off to see. The first sample that did not see any vacuum was significantly dirtier. It had a couple thousand parts per million of butane in it, but 5,000 parts per million is generally the limit for the states that you're probably watching this in, if you're processing legitimately. If not, then, well, you're not worried about that at all. But you want it to be clean because butane's a neurotoxin. You don't want that. Your buddies don't want that either. So the batch that I put under a 48-hour purge, after all that heat and after those days of crashing in that heat, it tested under 100 parts per million. I think it was at 50, maybe 67. I can't remember. It's been a while. But either way, so close. If I would have let it go for 55 hours, I'll bet I could have gotten a 0 ppm. So that just is what it is. And then, of course, I went back to the drawing board, and I purged it in a vessel about this size. If I would have done my 48-hour purge in a Pyrex that size, with it spread across the bottom, so thin that it actually couldn't even quite cover the entire bottom, instead of being like this where it covered it and it even came up a 1/4 inch. Obviously, I think my 48-hour purge would have been much more efficient. Surface area is so much your friend when purging. It is your enemy when crashing. Now by that I mean you want cubic space. You want to take up as much cubic space as you can if you're trying to grow big crystals. Now, that may not be the best method for speed, but for big clean crystals, you want depth. So for this specific video, since we've gone over jar tech, and I feel like I've told you a little bit about what I didn't do in this jar, which specifically was just that second or even third stage of dewaxing, which instead of letting go for a couple hours, I let go for a day and a half. When that is done as well, we end up with results like this. Look at the coloring. Ooh, look here. That's wild. Almost looks like there's still wax in this. Honestly, I don't know, but this is, we're going to give it a couple more minutes because it might just be adjusting to its temperature. As you can see, this jar is out and in a little more direct sunlight. So I need to just chill out a second and let the temperatures equilibrate. But this is what we're going for, ladies and gentlemen. You remember the coloring of the jar that we were working with last time. Same freshness of material, same everything. The only difference with this is that I put it through the rigors as far as dewaxing. I literally went so hard that I started pooling waxes, and I'm very concerned about that. It's really starting to point towards. But then again, it's also the way it's bubbling on the sides is making me think that we're actually getting close to saturation. So I'm going to bring these guys inside underneath the vent, and we'll let them equilibrate and see how jar number 2 looks. If jar number 2 needs a little bit more dewaxing, then I will cap it, put it back in the freezer, and I will then add it to the Pyrex pan at a you know what, that wouldn't be, because then I'll still end up with small crystal growth. So if that's the case, we're going to bring these inside now, and if that's the case, then we're going to go ahead and cap both of these and just let them both sit in the freezer until in case you guys are wondering what I mean when I say underneath the hood. That thing's a badass. So they sit right here whenever I just have, a couple final minutes of evaporation, I should say. Now, both of those jars, when they're done their evaporation, are going to get poured into this Pyrex pan. Why? Because we want a nice deep Pyrex pan, because we're going to grow some big crystals. Oh man. I don't think there's any way this cannot need to be dropped back in the freezer and then decanted. The good news is that I've let these evaporate far enough that, let's just take a quick volumetric guess here. Yeah, honestly, I would say they probably fit fine in there. I know The liquid is slightly higher right now. And by slightly, I really do mean slightly. Let me give you, what's that, like an eighth of an inch? There's going to be, you know, some room around because it's not in two separate jars. And then aside from that, this jar is clearly going to leave something in the bottom because there is some wax left in here. So, guys, I love you. And this is why these videos just, well, they're not the quickest and easiest things for me to put together. It's difficult to do this work and photo document it. It's difficult to do this and tell you tell you what's happening each step of the way. And then, of course, what's probably even more obvious than all of this is just that, well, you know, I have a lot, there's a lot going on. So it becomes very difficult for me to yeah, actually, you know what? I think we're okay on lipid content. We're definitely good to go on this guy. I think we're okay. I'm just putting this in the freezer right here. And it doesn't need to go into any kind of crazy deep freeze or anything like that. It needs to be in the freezer, actual freezer. You don't need to tighten down the lids tight. See? See how fast that's bubbling in there? Obviously that would have bumped back up that safety seal if it was tight. Like, watch. See? So right about the point where the safety seal will not bounce back up. And you're good to go. And you know you can sit it in the freezer, and as the freezer takes effect, it will stop any of its evaporation, stop boiling altogether. And then of course, aside from that, you're plenty tight enough to keep out any excess moisture or anything like that. And you have your jar inside there freezing and separating your wax again. But even more importantly, if by chance you were to, you know, I don't know, for some reason we were a little more saturated than we thought right now, and we were to initiate a little bit of a crash, then that's going to that's a problem, because crashing this early means that our crystals are not going to be clean. They're just not going to be clean. And they will not get big either. When your oil is not completely efficiently and perfectly de-waxed, and even sometimes when it is, it'll still crash into a sugar like this, no matter how long you let it go. You let it go and it keeps making a bigger puck and a bigger puck and a bigger puck, but it's still all sugar. Or table salt almost, it looks like, you know. But anyway, all right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and pick this right back up here in just a second. We'll pull those jars back out momentarily. Okay, guys, so by here in just a second, I guess I meant I was making too long of a video, and I don't know what the hell I meant. I thought I was going to be able to just keep the video going. And we did keep the video going. Unfortunately, in its full length, it crashed twice during upload. I don't know. So unfortunately, instead of that second just going right into the next part of the video, if you're seeing this, you've made it to the end of part 2A. And I apologize, but hopefully splitting the videos in half will give me the ability to share them with you. Otherwise, I'm going to be pretty disappointed. This was a large amount of content I put together. So, if you're watching this, part 2A has successfully uploaded, and hopefully part 2B is soon after. I appreciate you. I apologize. Thank you for bearing with me, and I hope you're getting some good information out of this. The only thing it's been a while since I've been trying to upload this for days, so, oh yeah,
If you have already used your space that you left underneath seed crystal to define seed crystal, and that's for those of you that are actually using notebooks, you're going to need more space. We actually really get into that in 2B. So much easier when I was able to say we cover all this in video too, but now it's 2 different videos. So it is what it is. I love you guys. Patrons, I love you. You're amazing. You're the reason that I keep coming in front of this camera. YouTube's fun. Instagram is interesting. But this is actually a reason to keep doing it. And just as much as I am passionate about making hash, I am truly just as passionate about teaching you how to make it as good or better. So, hang in there with me and hang in with YouTube's bandwidth restrictions. And again, if you've seen this, we've made it through 2A, so we can definitely get through 2B. Hopefully it's not too much longer.